Alright, so had this clock for, I just posted the unboxing like yesterday or something for this clock, but I really have had it for about a week or so. So I'm just gonna make a review a review of this clock and sort of a comparison to this knockoff clock, whatever brand this is. So yeah, start off with out of the box. So out of the box, there were good things and bad things, mainly bad things about this clock. I don't really remember what this clock was like out of the box, but the problem with this one was that it was really stiff, like really bad, like it was almost like impossible to turn. I think Eric Limack said that though, in his tutorial on how to solve it. So yeah, it was really bad. The pins, the pegs, or whatever, the knobs, whatever you would call these that you push in, they were pretty bad, and these were pretty bad. Like, you could barely push them, I'm just gonna call them pins, barely push them in, and you could barely turn the wheels. This one, I don't really remember what it was like out of the box, but I'm pretty sure the wheels were alright, and the pins were alright. So, out of the box, this clock definitely wins. However, a couple things about this clock are that, first of all, these pins are blue, and they kind of blend in with the background of the inserts and the clocks, whereas the pins on this one are yellow, and they have good contrast. Yeah, so that's just. And one other good thing about this one particular clock is that when I got the clock, the darker inserts were on the side with the lighter clocks, and the lighter insert was on the side with the darker clocks. On this one, you can tell, yeah, you can see how these clocks pop out more, and these clocks pop out more, and these kind of blend in with the inserts, and so do these. So yeah, that's one thing I like about this one particularly better. Although, if you're really going for the best clock you can get, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to take apart the clock anyway, and then you can just switch the inserts when it's apart. Anyway, so, moving on. Enough out of the box. I'm going to talk about how the movement is, and that's my arm. I'm going to talk about just how it is now. So, this clock the wheels, they turn really well. They turn better on the side with the lighter clocks for some reason. I don't know why that is. A quick little side note, this clock, I kind of messed up with lubrication, so this clock kind of looks a little bit weird. It doesn't really make a difference in the performance, but yeah. So it doesn't look like that when you get it. So all the clocks look perfectly normal. So yeah, the turning on this one is really good. The pins push in fine, and the wheels turn really nicely. Compared to this one, the pins push in a lot easier on the knockoff, which is a good thing and a bad thing. It could be a good thing because, it doesn't require as much effort to push in, but also a bad thing because the knobs, the pins tend to slide in and out when you don't want them to, so it leads to it's just irritating sometimes. Whereas that doesn't happen with this one. They take a little bit more effort, and it's not really that bad though. It's actually not bad at all, and they never really slide in when you don't want them to, so that's one positive about this clock. As for the wheels, they are a lot snappier on this clock. A lot snappier. The movement is just not quite as good. Yeah. It's just not as good. Another thing about the knockoff clock is that these clocks don't really line up perfectly with the inserts. Like, the corner clock here and this clock, they don't really line up the same. So sometimes when I'm solving on this clock, I will turn the cross to line this up with this clock and it'll be wrong and I'll get like a DNF or something. That happens less with my original clock, but it also can happen on the clock, on the original clock, because it's not perfect either. But yeah, it is still better on this clock. Turning is definitely much better on the original clock, and the pins don't just push in whenever you don't want it to. So, yeah. Pretty much it, I think. So I'm going to cover the pros and cons about each clock really quickly. Let's start with the good things about this clock that this clock doesn't have. So the first thing about this clock is that, at least in my opinion, this is a pro. The light inserts are on the darker clocks, on the side with darker clocks. Dark inserts are on the side with the lighter clocks. And whereas this one, yeah, just blends in too much. So that's one pro, at least in my opinion. Second pro is that the pins are yellow, and the pins on this one are blue, and they blend in too much. Third pro is the turning. Turning's better on this one, at least for the wheels. Fourth pro, the pins don't push in or come out when you don't want them to, and these tend to do that a little bit more because they're so loose. And I believe that is the pros. Of course, the light inserts on the dark clock side and all that stuff you can fix with taking it apart. Why am I moving the clock around like a crazy person? Anyway, so on to the cons about this clock. First of all, it's horrible out of the box. You really have to take it apart and lubricate it. Darn it. This one, really, if you don't want to take your clock apart and lube it, then I'd recommend getting this one, because you don't really have to do that really a whole lot, even though the turning on this isn't quite as good. Second, the pins don't work quite as easily. Now this is also kind of a pro, but it's also kind of a con, because the pins, you know, they're just a little bit more effortless on the knockoff clock. As far as I can tell, that's really all the cons about this one. The only other con I would have to say about this one is that this side tends to turn worse than this side. I don't know why that is, but I doubt it'll happen if you get a clock for yourself. So, I was going to say something else, but I don't really remember what it was. Yeah. One thing you do need to take into account before you go about, with this clock, is that this clock is a pain to take apart, and a pain to put back together. Like, taking it apart, you of course have to break all the glue and stuff, and putting it back together is just a hassle. You have to, it really requires a lot of lining up. It's just a pain in the neck. But overall, I will have to say that it was worth it for me. Now, I haven't taped it together or anything, and it doesn't really fall apart whenever I'm solving it or anything, so I didn't bother like taping it together or anything. And it still works fine. So yeah, I think that's about it. Overall, I will have to say, if you're going to try to be the best clocker in the world, or whatever, then you should probably buy this clock and take it apart and lubricate it. Now I haven't taken apart this clock and lubricated it or anything, but, so I can't really say whether or not this would be a good option. But this is definitely a good option, if you're wanting to get into clock. However, if you just want a clock, you don't want to mess around with taking it apart and all that, you just want a good clock, I would go ahead and get the Knockoff. It's a lot easier to get your hands on, and you don't really have to take it apart and all that stuff. You will have to lubricate it probably, but you don't really have to take the whole thing apart. You don't really have to take the whole thing apart on this one either, but yeah. However, even if you don't want to be a big clock speed solver, this is still a good collector's item to have. So, even if you're really not getting into clock and all that, I'd still recommend getting this I still think it's a good puzzle to have. You're not really wasting anything if you get one of these. So, the only real place you can get them now is eBay or someplace like that. At least original ones. I believe I got this clock off of either Amazon or iCubeMart. So those are places you can get this from, and I'm sure there are others. But really, for this one, you can only really get it off of eBay. But I definitely recommend, if you can get your hands on one, to get it. And if you're really wanting to be a speed solver, you're going to have to take it apart and lube it, and put it back together, which is a big pain. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about this puzzle. Really good, and once you lube it, I would recommend getting one if you can find one. That's all I have to say. So, have a good day. That rhymes.